sponsored by Cision. And content marketing allows brands to tell their stories in their own voice, but what effect does this have on their bottom line? In this session, Heidi Sullivan, the Senior Vice President of Digital Content at Cision, will share tools and techniques to measure the effectiveness of campaigns by looking at actions instead of just page views. And she'll be joined by Shonali Burke, the President and CEO of social PR consulting firm Shonali Burke Consulting, and I'll leave her to do the rest of the instructions. Thank you, and please give a warm welcome to Heidi and Shonali.
Thanks, Omar. So I think we're going to make a real switch from the last session where we're looking at some really creative video and some really exciting things to, unfortunately, I'm going to tell you now that you're talking to two metrics nerds, and what we really care about is how you can measure all of these campaigns. And just to kind of kick it off, I think what we've really heard this afternoon is so much about the importance of content and how content is really what's driving so many of these campaigns. But without really knowing how you're going to measure that, a pretty campaign is just that. So for those of you who are tweeting, Shonali is at Shonali, S-H-O-N-A-L-I, and I am at HKSully, H-K-S-U-L-L-Y. So without further ado, let's actually dive in, and I'm going to make you interact right after a break. So take a look at the texting polling question. Please text in your answer. What function do you spend most of your day doing? Is it marketing? Is it PR? Is it social? Is it content marketing? And I know that's kind of difficult because probably a lot of you are going to say, well, all of the above. But which is the one where you really spend the majority of your time? The reason I'm asking this is the next thing we're going to do, okay, we've got a lot of marketers, man. The reason that we're asking is what I really want to do here is highlight the convergence of paid, earned, owned, and shared. And those are like the buzzwords that we've been hearing for 5 years, and we're so tired of hearing about it. But content marketing is really starting to change this to an extent. So it's really important that everybody's sitting at the table together. We'll show you some examples of campaigns where everybody is working together to really combine all of those. So surprisingly, we're really quite divided here in how everybody spends the most of their day, which is good. You guys are on the forefront of convergence here. So at Cision, I work with PR professionals. So I'm going to give you the example on the communicator side. And the reason I'm starting there is that traditionally before content marketing, PR owned the story. When there was no news, when there was no campaign, PR had to come up with a story and they had to actually get it placed somewhere. So what we're seeing really as the trend here is that when you look at, I told you I was going to point up at this screen even though it's, that we're led by the head of PR and focused on earned media. I got to get in the New York Times, I want to be in FT, even I want to be in the Huffington Post, and the budget is devoted to their staff and their creative. It's getting writing done, it's getting great images. What we're really seeing the shift to is that the CMO, the ever more powerful CMO, is really having that direct reporting line to PR, and the focus is on this converged media. If you work in PR, chances are you do social. If you work in marketing, chances are you're doing content marketing. Everybody has to work together so that dotted line all goes up to the same place, focused on converged campaigns, and all of a sudden your budget is going to your technology, your content, and your advertising. Whether it's making a video, whether it's finding writers, whether it's having the right platform to really measure it, your budget's going to content and tech. So this is super old in social media terms. I think it was July 2012 that Rebecca Lieb and Jeremiah Oye from Altimeter Group came out with the Converged Media Imperative. I highly recommend it. It's actually a pretty quick read. It's not too bad. Both Jeremiah and Rebecca wrote blog posts that are digestible in 10 minutes. But the idea is, and I know this is really small to see, is that as marketers, as PR pros, as content marketers, our job flow is really starting to switch. So I'm going to start in the upper right-hand corner here, and that's when you have your content strategy. So whether you're a PR person or a marketer, what is the story? What's our strategy going to be here? Then you're publishing it across channels, whether this is social, whether it's actually on your own owned media, whether it's earned media through PR. You're engaging with people because for the first time in the past few years, we've had the opportunity to actually listen to people react to our stories. How are they receiving our messages and what messages have they created? Then as Jay Baer says, content is fire, social media is gasoline, whatever is actually taking off, that's what you're going to amplify. And we'll talk a little bit more about all of this later. But the interesting thing is, because there's so much feedback in all of this, because you're doing real-time measurement and iteration, you're really restructuring your campaigns as you go, you're reporting back to your boss, and that's how you're really starting to drive that going forward. Because we've been working under assumptions for a long time of what content works, what messages really work, and now we can actually measure that. So I'm going to turn it over to Shonali to talk a little bit more about measurement here.
Thank you, Heidi. Good afternoon, everyone. We live, as I said even earlier when we were doing the book giveaway, we do live in a very exciting time where we have so many different kinds of content to play with, so many different channels to use. All of that has created a bit of a crazy situation because oftentimes as marketers, as communication professionals, we forget why we are doing this to start with. So when you think about the business purpose of business communication, it's really to help an organization, which is typically at one end of a divide from its publics or its audiences, to communicate through that divide to its publics to help motivate them to taking some action which will help achieve business outcomes, right? That's why we do what we do, or that's why we should be doing what we do. And so I'm not going to talk about pipelines and the sales funnel and all of that stuff, but on the communication timeline, what we really are doing or should be doing is making sure our slides don't advance automatically, for one. But is really educating our audiences as to what our business is about, what our organization is about, why it's important for them to know about it, why it's important for them to care about it, to really cultivate them into becoming our supporters, ideally our evangelists, and to motivate them into taking certain outcomes, right? And the problem is that we have so much to do this with now that we end up with this mess of marketing buzzwords and jargon, and we talk about marketing and podcasting and tweeting and vining and thising and thating, and at the end, and then you have your clients and your organization going, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, it's just too much and I can't do it anymore, and help me make sense of it. So what ends up happening is that because we're just trying to make sense of everything, we end up just doing shit. Excuse me, but I did say that. And what that means is we just end up putting the cart before the horse because we're not asking two very important questions. What is it we are trying to do and why is it important? If we are not constantly asking and answering those extremely important questions when it comes to our work, when it comes to our business communications, there's a very, very strong chance that they will not succeed. So before we get into all of the wonderful stuff that we can do with content and the wonderful world of content marketing, we really need to take a very, very large step back and think about what we are doing to set our objectives and messaging, which is then what we're going to weave our entire programs around. And for that, we have to understand three things. We have to understand our landscape. We have to understand the mediums of communication, the languages, the mediums of communication that we have and that our audiences use, and the language that they use to communicate. There are three very simple steps to do this. They're not necessarily easy, but they are simple. And the first is a very basic SWOT analysis that I'm still surprised at how many people don't do in some shape or form. But if you sit down and really think about what it is you are trying to achieve, think about your organization, the communication issue at hand, think about what your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats are, your strategy is going to start revealing itself to you. And those of you who do this on a regular basis will know this. In addition to my consulting business, I teach at Johns Hopkins, and the very first thing that I have my students do, these are grad students, but they have to, as part of their entire course where they research and develop an integrated communication plan that involves digital for a client, they have to sit down and do their research, because if we don't do that, we don't know the landscape in which we are about to start working.
You know, as we touch on this, There was a study I read from Dartmouth this morning, and I'll tweet it out from my handle later because I'm going to give you the wrong percentages right now since I just read it this morning. But they came out really asking questions about the Inc. 500's usage of social media monitoring and social media in general. And the really surprising fact was that from 2010 to 2013, the number of those companies actually doing social media monitoring dropped fairly significantly. It was like from something in the 70s to the high 50s. And I think part of that is this idea that we all jumped on the bandwagon in 2007, 2008, 2009, 2010. Everybody has Twitter, everybody's doing social media monitoring, I want to do it too. And it's that cart before the horse, that without knowing what the strategy was, all of a sudden it became a big budget line item that you didn't really have anything that you could show for. So that's why this is so important. You're going to implement a bunch of things, do a lot of work, and eventually you're not going to have anything to show for it without it.
And the other thing is that you get tired because you're investing so much time, you're investing so much energy, and sometimes a lot of money, and then when you're not setting metrics up from the start, and when you're not really setting up what it is you're trying to achieve and how you're going to do this in a measurable way, and measurable means time-bound and quantifiable. I've forgotten what the second one was for a moment, just blind. Oh my God, what is it? But if it's not quantifiable and if it's not time-bound, it is not a measurable objective. Getting lots of hits, I hate to break it to you, but that's not a measurable objective. Understanding the mediums is really important, and this is where we have a plethora of tools at our disposal. But what again often happens is that we get so caught up in the tools, we get so caught up in what they can actually show us, that we forget to grab the data. We forget to actually look for what it is we are trying to find and get completely lost and overwhelmed. So it's really important to understand the platforms that people are using and the language that they are using to communicate with each other. These are the three really, really important things to do, especially at the start of a planning cycle, especially at the start of a campaign, and it's certainly important to do it throughout, but it's extremely important to do it at the start, because if you don't do these three things, it's going to be very hard to set your program up for success.
So I think one thing that we need to do as we're setting that up for success at the beginning is really look at what audience we're addressing. And I think for a long time, we used a lot of distribution methods that helped raise our SEO, but what we're really seeing now is that Google is placing more of an importance than ever on original content and regular original content that people are engaging with. You don't have original content, your SEO is out the window. So part of this has been a shift in the way that we digest content. You know, it's the end of news as an event. For a long time, it was, I'm going to sit down at 9 p.m. and watch the news because it's 9 p.m. and that's what I do. Or I'm going to pick up the newspaper on the train on my way to work in the morning, and that's how I digest my news. Well, none of us do that anymore. And a few of us now, because we're media savvy people in marketing and PR, probably still do that. But most people are getting email alerts on Facebook, and it's all aggregated and in real time. And so this article, if 2012 wasn't early enough for you, I realized that way back in 2008 is like 100 years ago in social media terms. This was Brian Stelter in the New York Times writing an article. It was right around the presidential election. You'll probably remember this. Everybody freaked out and it's like, oh my God, young people are only getting their news from Jon Stewart, and that's how they're making up their minds. And the point was, that wasn't the truth at all. Sure, they weren't actually picking up the New York Times, but they were digesting real news in other ways. But this college student says, if the news is that important, it's going to find me. So as users, that's awesome, right? I mean, we have to merely lift a finger and boom, all of the news that we need is right in front of us. As marketers and PR professionals, super difficult. How are we ever going to get to those people? It used to be, if I advertise on this site, if I get my article on this in this magazine, I'm set. That does the job for me. Now we actually have to find people in the myriad places that they exist. So what this really comes down to is sharing content outside your circles. So I like to look at it in three different circles. So you've got you, right? And then in your first circle, you've got the people that you're really close to. These are the people that are going to share your content, whether it's good or bad or no matter what, and that is my adorable mom. So that's your mom, your coworkers, your friends. These are the people who really care about everything you have to say, whether it's what you had for breakfast or not. And then you have this second circle, and those are your customers, your fans, and the friends of those friends that you have. So you are reaching people that you don't necessarily know yet, but they're friends of friends. The problem is there are people who are truly interested in your content, truly interested in your brand, in this third circle that you don't even know. And at this point, because traditional news mediums aren't necessarily the only way that we can reach those people, it's getting really hard to reach them. So I got another polling question for you. Pull out your phones. How do you currently reach that third circle? Maybe it's through social sharing. Maybe you've dipped your toe in native advertising, which can include social ads. Maybe it's your traditional advertising through digital print broadcasts, or it's a combo. Or maybe you say, I don't care about the third circle. I have been focused on my customers and the people that they know. So the difficult thing about this is that there's a lot of different strategies on how you can do it, but social sharing, and we'll see that's one answer so far, tends to be what all of us go to. And it's because of what we were touching on earlier in a previous session. It's expensive to do some of these other things, and certainly in communications, who was it from MSL? It said it was a dirty word in PR. Start talking about paid. Yeah. So it is really difficult to start thinking about other ways. The trouble with social sharing is that it really starts to limit us because eventually you're going to run into that same problem. Your followers are still going to be your followers, and it's hard to really find those people who are living in communities that you're not really involved with yet. And I see that no one's actually submitted native advertising either. So I'll talk about 3 different strategies. One, obviously, is through social sharing and spreading your message. What I would encourage you to do is that no matter how many followers you have, no matter what you can do, finding advocates that you don't even know exist, and I'm not talking about influencers yet, we'll talk about that in a minute. Finding advocates in little pockets is a great way to get introduced to new people. So at Cision, personally, we have a group, we use a service called Gaggle Amp, but you can do this for email alerts or whatever you want. I always say that too quickly. It's gaggle like geese, amp like amplification. And basically, we share a bunch of relevant posts on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn, and some of it is about us. Most of it is an interesting article that Shanali wrote on her blog, or somebody else wrote, or a Dartmouth study, or whatever it happens to be. And we have, I think it's about 50 employees at Cision that have said, you know what, I would like to get more involved in our community. I'm going to share this kind of content. And they share that content to their circles, which are slightly different than Cision's circles, and we start to grow from there. And maybe it's your coworkers, maybe it's your top fans who are big advocates, but find new ways to spread that message through other people. We talk a lot about relationships with influencers. There is no silver bullet with this one, but it really can help you more than just about anything else. And why I say there's no silver bullet, you have to build a relationship. And that's really a difficult thing. Sometimes this lives in marketing, sometimes it lives in PR, but truly finding out who those people are who have a voice that resonates, and it's not about number of followers. What we've found is we've started mapping out influencers every single time. If you don't have time to look up 1,000 metrics, influencers talk to each other because they're the ones producing original content, they're the ones who are really coming up with the innovative ideas, and so they know each other. So take a look at one of the bloggers you identify as an influencer and look at their blog roll and who else they're talking to. Follow them on Twitter, follow them on other social channels and see who they're talking to. And all of a sudden you're gonna find yourself with a fairly solid list of influencers that you can begin to build relationships with. This can be really easy. Your social media manager can start reading a bunch of blogs. So our social media manager, she has about 60 blogs in her blog roll, or in her RSS reader. She can't read 60 posts a day. Who can? Scans the headlines, picks 2 or 3 a day that she finds interesting, and then comments on them. And then when we actually want something from that influencer, we want to talk to them, they're like, oh yeah, my old buddy Lisa, who comments on my blogs all the time and is always sharing my stuff. I'd be happy to do that for her. So that's another great key. But the last one I want to talk about is native advertising, or amplification is the big sexy word, right? That we all use, and it's all amalgamous, and we don't really know what it means. So I really like Merriam-Webster's definition, which is just to increase the strength or amount of, especially to make louder, which is really what we're trying to do, is take our message wherever it lives and make it even louder. Some of that's through social sharing and influencers. When you think about native advertising, you know, I think a lot of us choose to go and say, okay, I'm gonna try Facebook advertising, I'm gonna try Twitter, but we're not thinking about the content.